Okay, here we are in lesson 5. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about Essay 1. I'm going to give you the Essay 1 assignment sheet, and we're going to go over how do you actually write Essay 1. So again, here are the objectives, and we have 4 for this one. First, I'm going to give you the Essay 1 assignment sheet. We're going to review it in this video lesson, but you can also download it from the learning software underneath this video lesson. We're also going to review the topics for Essay 1, and hopefully you're going to choose a topic during this video lesson. Then we're going to talk about how to create a pro and con list and brainstorm ideas for the topic, how to design Essay 1. So let's take a quick look at the Essay 1 assignment sheet. So you can get this off of MyCC. Like I said, it'll be placed right below this lesson, Lesson 5. Make sure you read it really carefully, but we're also going to take a quick look at it right now. So here's the Essay 1 assignment sheet. All my assignment sheets will look like this. I'll have the name of the assignment at the top. Deadlines will come right underneath. I always like to do some kind of an overview of the essay. I have a clear section that describes the assignment, what it is that I'm looking for in the essay. And then usually there'll be some section that talks about the writing process and gives you some writing advice. And finally there'll be a section that covers the grammar feature for the essay. So for each of our essays we'll have a major grammar feature that you're going to be focusing on. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the grading and how it's going to be graded. So let's take a quick look right now. So the deadlines for this essay, there are 2. We're going to have a first draft and a second draft. So the first draft of the essay is going to be due as soon as possible. You could start writing this draft right after you finish this lesson. I want you to take that draft and email it to me just like you did with the journal. I'm going to review your first draft, make comments, give you feedback, and send it back to you with my comments. Once you get my comments back, I want you to revise your essay and try to make the changes that I suggest, and email me your final draft. And once you email me your final draft, you can move on to Unit 2. So I'll review that final draft, and I'll give you more comments on that draft, as well as a grade. And if you still would like to revise the final draft after you get my final feedback, you can do that. But all that's required is the first draft and the second draft. So let's take a look at the overview. So up until now in this unit we've been talking about the basics of essay structure and argumentation or argument. In Lesson 4 we talked about introductions to arguments, right? We talked about counter-arguments, we talked about defending reasons, and we looked at a good sample of a 6-paragraph argumentative essay on why kids under 13 should be allowed to have Facebook accounts. So hopefully that lesson and Lesson 3 kind of give you a good idea of what makes up a strong essay and how do you create a strong argument. So for this essay, the assignment, I want you to create your own 2 to 3 page 6-paragraph argumentative essay on one of the following 5 topics. So you can pick any one of these 5 topics. Here are my 5 questions. Should parents allow their kids under 13 to have smartphones? Nice question for parents with young kids. Should public schools require kids to wear uniforms? Nice question if you have kids, but also a nice question for anybody, because everybody's had to be at school at some point. Should kids under 18 have a mandatory curfew at 10 p.m.? A lot of people like this question. Here's a really current one. Should police officers be required to wear body cameras? And finally, probably the most serious one, should the death penalty be banned in the United States? So many different kinds of questions. I think each of these questions can and has produced a very strong argument before, so you could have luck with any of these questions. But in order to really have a lot of luck with this essay, you want to make sure that you have a clear thesis on your question, that is a stance, yes or no, a counter-argument that examines the other side, and at least 3 supported reasons. So your reasons should be well developed with your own evidence. You want to make sure you use examples and personal explanations, personal examples and general examples, but do not consult any outside research. This should really just be about your ideas, your explanation, your examples in here. So that's the idea for the assignment. So for the writing process, we're going to actually talk about the writing process a little bit more in this video lesson, but you can always go back to lesson 3 and lesson 4 anytime you want. That's one of the really nice things about having these video lessons is you can return to them anytime and review them. And that can help you if you get stuck with any part. Like let's say you're stuck with counterarguments. Go back to lesson 4 and review the counterarguments section. Or you're not sure how to end with a conclusion. Take a look at the conclusion section in lesson 3 or lesson 4. In addition, I'm going to be available through email. So if you have any questions or run into any issues, you can always email me. And if it's a really quick question, I'll probably get back to you within a few minutes. If it's a more complicated question, it might take me a little bit longer. But I will get back to you quickly. So you should always feel like you're supported and you have me here as you're working through the process. Also, although the first draft is not graded, you want to put your best effort into that draft. And I'm going to give you some feedback on it. And the idea here is that you see my feedback and that helps you to learn and develop more as a writer. So if you don't put your best effort into the first draft, the comments that I make on your first draft might be comments that you would have fixed on your own anyway. So you really want to make your first draft as good as possible so you can get the most out of my feedback. So for this essay, we're also going to have a special grammar feature. So the grammar feature for this essay is going to be understanding sentence types, using a variety of sentence types, and avoiding fragments, comma splices, and run-ons. So I'm going to talk about all of those in lesson 6, which will cover the basic grammar feature for this unit. So you definitely want to make sure you watch lesson 6, unless you're already familiar with those items. Plus, I think it's really helpful. I like that lesson quite a bit. So definitely make sure you go to lesson 6 and watch it either right after this lesson before you start drafting, or you could draft the first draft of your essay and then go watch lesson 6 and go back and sort of edit your essay based on the things I talk about in there. Lastly, with grading, so the grading of the final draft is going to be based on structure mostly. So do you have an introduction? Does it follow the things we talked about in the lessons? Do you develop 3 distinct reasons, and do you do it well with examples and evidence? Do you include some kind of counter-arguments into the essay, and do you handle those counter-arguments in some way? Do your paragraphs stay unified? This is going to be a big part. Do each of your reasons stay on track, and do you have topic sentences for each of those? Do you have an effective conclusion? And then finally, the grammar feature. Do you use a variety of sentence types? Do you avoid fragments, comma splices, and run-ons? So that's basically the assignment sheet. So you can, again, download that from the learning software underneath this video lesson. Make sure you read it carefully, but that'll give you some good ideas of how to do it. But let's flip back now to the PowerPoint. And I want to talk a little bit about starting your essay, right? So the first most important thing to do is choose one of the 5 questions. So here are those questions again. I think they're pretty interesting. I think you could have good luck with any of them. What you really want to do is take a look at them. Which one interests you the most? Are you interested in kids under 13 having smartphones? Do you think this is a good idea? Not a good idea? Do you think it's a good idea for kids to wear uniforms to schools or not? What about kids under 18, especially if you have an older teenager? Do you think they should be required to have a mandatory curfew of 10 p.m. Or not? What about police officers wearing body cameras? Is this a good idea? What are some of the benefits for them to wear body cameras? What are some of the problems? Finally, what about the death penalty? This really comes from the Johar Zanaya verdict that was just recently handed down that he's going to get the death penalty. Do you think this is a good idea? or do you think it's not a good idea? Or just more generally, do you think the U.S. should have the death penalty or not have the death penalty? I think any of these questions is interesting, but choose the one that interests you the most. And once you have a good question, then you just want to sort of follow through the writing process. So all writing goes through 5 stages, right? And the more deliberately you work through the 5 stages, the better your final pieces will be. If you skip any of these stages or don't give it your full attention, your writing won't be as good as it could be. So here are the 5 stages: generate, plan, draft, revise, and edit. No matter what you're writing, you have to start by generating ideas. If you're doing an essay, you have to sort of brainstorm and come up with the ideas yourself. If you're writing research, maybe you generate by conducting research. Once you have a whole bunch of ideas, they're just sort of scattered, then you need to put them into some kind of order, and that's what planning is. It's sort of figuring out, how am I going to organize my essay? What's going to come first? Second, third, what's going to come fourth? Fifth, sixth, what's going to come seventh? A lot of times people like to make outlines to help them plan how they're going to write their essays. This is especially important for a longer piece, and when we get to the final research essay, I'm going to require you to complete an outline as part of the planning process. Next, there's drafting. So once you have a plan, then you just draft it. A lot of people call this the sloppy copy. That's sort of just basically getting your ideas down, generally trying to get all the material on the page in about the right order. Then you want to revise, which is go back and to re-see or reimagine your work. Does anything need to be cut or developed or moved? Those are all the tools of a reviser. Finally, editing is more surface level. You're looking at grammar, mechanics, sentences. It's definitely an important part in the process. It's the proofreading. You don't want to skip that. So the process is recursive. Generally everybody goes through the stages this way to this way. That's the most direct. But sometimes when you start generating ideas, maybe you have a good, you find a bunch of good material, you plan out an essay that seems to make sense, but then when you start drafting the essay, you realize that you don't have enough material. So you're going to have to go back and regenerate some more ideas, and then plan how those ideas are going to fit into your essay, and then redraft the essay. Maybe you'll get all the way down to the revision phase, and you realize you don't have enough material, and you'll have to jump back to the generating phase again. So it is recursive in the sense that it doesn't always follow linearly from first to end. Sometimes you have to sort of jump around there. But essentially those are the parts of the writing process, and I really want you to try to work through those parts deliberately in this class. So the first part is generating ideas, right? Since we're not using research, we're going to start with the brainstorm. It's my fancy brain graphic with lights on it. I think a really good strategy for this essay, for an argument essay, is to start with the pro and con list. And it can be helpful to use a pro and con chart. Essentially, you say to your question, what are the pros? Or why would somebody say yes to this question? Versus, what are the cons? Or why would somebody say no to this question? So you want to start that way and start gathering your pros. Maybe you have a few, 3, 4, try to get as many as you can. Cons, gather as many as you can. Make sure you don't limit yourself as you're gathering your pros and cons, because maybe if you really mine it, if maybe you come up with 6 or 7 or 8 pros, then you can sort of have your pick and say, so what do I want to narrow down? What are going to be my 3 main pros or my 3 main cons here? So use the brainstorm just to generate as much as possible in your pro and con list. Let's try a sample of the pro and con list. Here's a sample question. So this isn't one of the questions that you're going to have, although I could have just as easily given you this one. It's a good one too, but I wanted to use it for a sample. So here's a question, controversial. Should Massachusetts require towns to pay for full-day kindergarten? So if we were to choose this question, we might ask, what are some of the pros here? Why would somebody say, yes, Massachusetts should require towns to pay for full-day kindergarten? Versus, what are some of the cons? Why would somebody say no? This is especially important to me because I have 2 young kids, so I know how expensive daycare is. I know that it would be helpful if they would have full-day kindergarten, so I know myself that some of the pros, some of the reasons to say yes to kindergarten is it would save parents money. But I think it would also have some educational pros. Maybe the children would have a better start with education. Which would ultimately make the schools perform better. Maybe they'd have higher test scores, which could result in higher funding for the schools. That could be one of the pros. They can also develop socially, right? Education is not just about learning in terms of actual book knowledge, but it's also about social. I don't know what happened to that S, but it's also about social benefits. So, yeah, it could help kids develop socially. I think those are pretty good. So we got 4 solid. I'm just doing a sample here, but you might mine your topic a little bit more and see how many you can come up with. Make sure you get at least 3. Some of the cons would definitely be, the money. It would be expensive for schools to do this. They'd have to hire more teachers. It might also be too early. Maybe kids are better off being at home. Maybe they don't need to be pushed into education so quickly. That could be another con. Maybe developmentally they're not ready socially, so it could be too early academically, or it could be too early socially. That is, maybe they have like separation anxiety. That I know a lot of kids get when they first go to schools. Yeah, so those are pretty good. So we've got a good list of pros and cons here. So I think that's what you want to start with, is ask yourself, what are your pros and your cons? But then you also want to plan your essay. And use your pro and con list to plan your essay. So you want to ask yourself, based on these pros and these cons, weigh them, what's going to be my thesis? So in this particular case, I'm kind of biased, but I might say that my thesis would be this. Yes, Massachusetts should require towns to pay for full-day kindergarten. I think that would be a pretty good thesis, so I have it, down here. This is the actual statement that I'm going to put at the end of my intro. Remember, the thesis goes at the end of the intro. So yes, Massachusetts should require towns to pay for full-day kindergarten. And some of the reasons why, you need to have 3, so I would say, saves parents money. There's an educational benefit, and how about the social benefit? So those could be my 3 reasons. I also want to make sure I look at the counter-argument, so I'll probably talk about how some people might say it's too expensive, or some people might say it's too early. And that gives me a plan for my essay. If I know I'm going to put my counter-argument second, first I'm going to have my intro, and then I'm going to have my counter-arguments. So I'd say some people might say it's too expensive, Other people might say it's too early. They say this and this. And then I'd move into my arguments and say, however, it's a good idea for towns to pay for full-day kindergarten because of my first reason, it saves parents money. And because of my second reason, it could give them an academic or education advantage. My third reason, it could help them develop social bonds that are important. And then I have my conclusion. So I think that would be pretty straightforward. So doing something like this, brainstorming and planning is a really important step in the process. It could be really helpful to do just even a short outline, like this, and gathering your ideas. So once you get all this planning together, you want to start drafting your essay. So your first draft is usually called your sloppy draft. That's when you're just basically getting the ideas down on the page. Here's a cute little comic that I like. There he is, or there he is writing again. There's Snoopy just typing away. Be like Snoopy, right? Just get there. Just start typing your work and getting it down on the page. Don't limit anything that you're doing when you're writing. You want just the ideas to sort of come out however they come out. You can always go back, and you need to go back and change those later. Make sure that you have the important characteristics of the essay, though. Make sure you have an introduction, and keep in mind those tips from Essay 3 where we talked about introduction. Make sure you end with your thesis. You want to make sure you move into your counter-arguments, probably after your intro, although they could come later too. Make sure you introduce the opposition's idea and say, some people say this. Following your counter-arguments, you want to move into your reasons. Remember that you want to keep your topics, use topic sentences, and also keep your paragraphs unified, right, so that they're only focused on one idea. After your reasons, you want to move into your conclusion. Make sure that you restate your thesis in that conclusion, and also make sure you end with some kind of an impact. Leave an impact on the reader. And once you finish that first draft, you're not quite done, right? You might think you're done, but you're not. You need to keep calm and start revising, right? I like this little graphic here. Always make sure you revise your work, right? Don't just write a first draft or a sloppy draft and turn it in without looking at it again. So you want to look at it in two ways. The first way is revising, which, as I mentioned before, means revisioning, or literally re-seeing your work. So when you revise, you ask broad questions like, does my introduction work, or do I need to redo it? Is my thesis clear? Have I stated it clearly at the end of the intro? Are my reasons convincing, or does one or more of them seem like it's not that strong? Have I examined counter-arguments to my essay? Are my topic sentences strong? Are my paragraphs unified? Do they stay focused on one point? And does my conclusion end strongly? You want to ask those kinds of things as you're revising, and if you answer no to any of them, you want to change it. Go back and redo your work. That's what revision is all about, and really good writing comes through revision. But you also want to make sure you're editing too. So once your essay is drafted and revised, and you're happy with it generally, then you want to move on to proofreading and editing carefully. Don't skip this step. There are so many times where small mistakes get through in essays and people say, oh, I should have known that, or I can't believe I missed that. This is the step where you just want to take time and look carefully at your sentences, your word choices, your grammar, and your punctuation, and ask, have I gotten everything as perfectly as possible? Something like this. Here's a good example of an editor's edits. Here's an I'm, right? He missed the apostrophe here, not obsessed. He misspelled obsessed. He forgot the period here. You need to capitalize for a new sentence. He forgot the O in editor. That's what you're doing, basically, when you're editing your work. Just do it to the best of your ability, right? The only thing I'm asking you to be particularly mindful of is using sentence variety, avoiding fragments, avoiding run-ons, and avoiding comma splices. And we're going to talk about those more in Lesson 6. But yeah, make sure when you are in the editing phase that you're looking at those aspects. Then, once you're done, you've worked through all of the process, you revised and you've edited, you want to send your draft, right? So make sure you email me your draft as a Word document attachment, just like you did with Journal 1, to brooks.winchell@go.cambridgecollege.edu. So I'll send you feedback quickly, take my feedback, revise your essay for your final draft, and then send it back to me again. After you send your final draft back, you can move on to Unit 2, even before I get you feedback on that. Just as long as you sent me your final draft of Essay 1, move on to Unit 2, and at that point you'll be about a quarter of the way through the course. So we're moving through pretty quickly here. So you should be happy about that. Here's my little smiley face. Have a nice day, and come back to Lesson 6 for some grammar. Otherwise, I'll see you in Unit 2. All right?